Our presidents' legacies loom large. We've carved their faces into stone, named schools and airports and cities in their honor. But for historian Annette Gordon-Reed and journalist Jonathan Alter and the late Cokie Roberts, the stories of the women in our presidents' lives can teach us new lessons about the presidency and the nature of power. I'm David Rubenstein. All my life, I've been passionate about American history. I think that by learning from the past, we can better shape the future. I've spent years interviewing experts to learn more about the U.S. presidency and American power. In this series, I revisit these interviews and bring their stories to light. Many of our country's first leaders had strong women by their sides. And despite their lack of official power, these women had a tremendous amount of influence and left a lasting mark on American history. Take the country's very First Lady, Martha Washington. As the late Cokie Roberts explains, she worked tirelessly on behalf of the patriot cause.
I think that these women from the beginning have been very politically interested and have usually found some kind of cause. Martha Washington became very interested in the veterans, and she lobbied Congress for veterans benefits for the Revolutionary War veterans.
And she would help her husband in many different ways.
Yes, but she had to figure it out. Here we had just fought this war to fend off a monarchy, so we couldn't be too grand. But it also had to be formal enough and impressive enough so that the European countries wouldn't think we were a bunch of rubes and this couldn't possibly be a country. And so she had to walk a fine line, and it was not easy.
Correspondence between founding fathers and their wives detail the challenges they faced when forming the new country. Many historians find the letters from U.S. First Ladies incredibly rich and insightful, arguably much more so than those of their male counterparts.
The men's letters are studied and edited and pompous, and they expect them to be preserved and published. And so that's how they read. The women's letters are letters, and they don't expect us to be reading them 225 years later. And so they just wrote. So you get a much more complete picture of American society.
One of the most famous letters is one that Abigail says to John Adams, "Don't forget the ladies." What is she referring to?
So she had been militating for a long time for independence. And she kept saying to John, she kept writing letters at the Continental Congress saying, "Declare independency." And then she thought, well, now if that does finally happen, you're going to have to form a new government. And what kind of government should that be? And she had all kinds of ideas about taxes and tariffs and all of that. But she said, but when you do form that new government, remember the ladies, because men would all be tyrants if they could. And he laughed at her.
Women were indeed forgotten. In the new United States, it was also clear that black women would not have rights. Third President Thomas Jefferson, a widower, fathered 6 children with Sally Hemings, a woman he enslaved.
The rumors about him began around 1798 and 1799.
If somebody's accused of having children with a slave, which was not considered to be socially appropriate for whites in those days, certainly not for President of the United States, you presumably would respond. What did Jefferson say?
Nothing. He was thinking, oh, if I'm okay on the public side, this private stuff, that's not anybody's business.
Other than his inaugural addresses, Jefferson never spoke to the general public. Instead, he used gatherings at the White House to communicate his policies. He needed someone to host these important events. Jefferson turned to the wife of his Secretary of State, Dolly Madison. She developed it into a powerful position, one that continued to evolve when her own husband, James Madison, was elected president, and she herself became First Lady.
Starting when Madison was Secretary of State, she started having these big parties in Washington. And everybody had to come because that's where all the deals got made. That's where all the intelligence was exchanged. Her squeezes, as they were called, because there were so many people there. You had to be there if you wanted to get political information or make political deals. And at one point, after she became First Lady, the Federalists, the opposition party, thought they would boycott her squeezes because, they were mad at Madison. They discovered they couldn't because they wouldn't learn anything if they weren't there.
Dolly Madison was such an influential political figure, her career went on long after her husband's death.
After James Madison died in 1836, she came back to Washington. She was very revered, incredibly revered, and she had a seat of her own in the House of Representatives. Any head of state who came to Washington called on her. Presidents sought her advice all of the time, all of that. She reigned over the city for a very long time.
As decades and generations passed, the young country grew. Women successfully fought for suffrage and the right to hold public office, and continued to expand their role in politics. By the 20th century, strong First Ladies redefined their job even further. The late Cokie Roberts and Jonathan Alter told me about how these women stood by their husbands' sides, but also took on more presence and power and motivated change.
Lady Bird Johnson and Betty Ford, they ran the political conventions, they ran their husbands' campaigns, they ran voter registration drives. Along with the African American women in Washington, they ran social service agencies.
They have had a hugely successful political and personal partnership. When Carter is assembling his team for an important decision, he'll say to his secretary, get me Rosalind Cy Vance, Secretary of State. It's big. National Security Counselors, Hamilton Jordan, Chief of Staff. Note the order. First, it's Rosalind. Not only was she sitting in on cabinet meetings, not only was she the first lady who was ever a diplomat, she was an extraordinarily important political advisor, in part because she had much better political judgment than her husband did, and he probably should have listened to her more when he was president.
Each First Lady makes the role her own. Michelle Obama, our first African-American First Lady, worked on children's physical health and fitness. Melania Trump aimed to end bullying. And Jill Biden, like our first First Lady, focuses on veterans and their families. Future First Ladies and First Gentlemen can always look back and learn from the inspirational women who came before and shaped our nation.